another classic movie review. Today I will be talking about the 90s thriller Consenting Adults, which was directed by Alan Pukala and written by Matthew Chapman. So this 1992 film stars Kevin Spacey and Rebecca Miller as a couple who move into a new neighborhood in Atlanta. Spacey's character Eddie is this high-flying financial advisor who is not afraid to flaunt his expensive taste. Their new neighbors Richard and Priscilla, played by Kevin Kline and Mary Mastrantino respectively. They are more of an ordinary couple who seem to live a quiet life. Eddie and Kay move in, and very quickly the two couples get acquainted. Over time, a friendship between the two couples emerges, and we have several scenes where we see the two couples hanging out, meeting up, going out, and doing stuff together. Kevin Spacey is great in this role as Eddie Otis. The character, as I said, is loud and carefree. He's continuously looking for new challenges and new experiences. Whereas Kevin Kline's character, Richard, he is more straight-laced, a kind of formal type of guy. So naturally, Richard is kind of wowed by Eddie's lifestyle and kind of his attitude towards life. Richard, who also has a musical background, strikes up a close bond with Eddie's wife, Kay, played by Rebecca Miller. She also has a musical background of some sorts, and so the two connect through that. So the weeks go by, and eventually Eddie hints to Richard the idea of wife swapping. Initially, Richard downplays the talk as a joke. As the days go on, Eddie continuously brings this up in conversation to the point where eventually Richard gets angry at Eddie and the two have a falling out over this so-called idea about wife swapping. And then we see Richard over the course of days pondering his decision about, falling out with Eddie, and, kind of thinking maybe, the temptation starts to seep into Richard's head. We see Richard having trouble at work composing music, and he's just really struggling. We eventually see Eddie and Richard make peace, they make up, and Richard is now kind of willing to go along with this wife swap idea. This all happens very quickly, and in the next scene we see the swap happen. It's late at night, both Richard and Eddie leave their own houses. They meet on the driveway. There's this look exchange between the two, no words are said, and then the two guys go into each other's own houses. So the wife swap is on, it takes place, yet in the lead up to this, we don't get any specific indication from the wives consenting to the swap. Earlier on in the movie, we do see a few scenes between Kay and Richard. They have a kind of discussion about their own marriages. They talk and they become friends. But Kay is a married woman, and at no point does she indicate that she wants to sleep with Richard. And if we look at Priscilla and Eddie, vice versa, there's no real indication that the two want to actually sleep with each other. The couples get on, they're friendly, they're having fun, but, like Richard's wife Priscilla, she never indicates she wants to sleep with Eddie at any point. And I guess this brings up one of my dislikes for this movie. The idea of the wife swap is introduced. We see Richard's dilemma and him coming to terms with the idea, but then we quickly go into this wife swap seemingly without the wife's knowledge. As I said, after Richard and Eddie make peace with each other, the next scene we see the wife swap take place. The idea worked well on paper, but the execution of this whole thing just felt really stupid and kind of ridiculous. This is a very interesting idea for a story. I think the concept is very interesting, having this wife swap revolving around two wealthy American couples. I just assumed this would be more fleshed out. I thought we would at least get a scene with both couples openly discussing the idea, but yeah, that just didn't happen. This wife swap idea is only discussed between Richard and Eddie. So the movie is called Consenting Adults, but I guess you could really retitle this movie Consenting Husbands, because it seems the women have no say in the matter. The idea that's floated is that both guys will just climb into bed with each other's wives and begin having sex with them. Like as if the wives would just be okay with waking up to find their neighbour, humping them. It's just like a massive plot hole that easily could have been avoided if there were a few more scenes involving the wives discussing it and kind of giving consent. So we see Richard sleeping with Kay, and it's also insinuated that Eddie does the same, though we don't actually see any sex scenes between Eddie and Priscilla. They go back to each other's houses, and then the next day Richard wakes up to see all this kind of police activity outside his house. He goes outside and discovers that Kay has been killed, and Eddie is kind of like causing this commotion, and he's saying, this guy did it, my neighbour Richard, he killed my wife, and immediately Richard is arrested. All in a matter of like seconds this takes place. I don't know, yeah, with the build up and everything, I didn't necessarily expect a murder, but I kind of thought maybe we would have something like a rape accusation instead, which I think would be probably more interesting rather than this kind of like definitive like murder. But it happened, and yeah, Richard is taken into custody. So the police start investigating Kay's death, and of course Richard's DNA is on her body. We then see a scene between Priscilla and Richard in some sort of a visiting cell. Priscilla is of course completely confused with the idea, like what's like, you killed Kay, like, I can't believe it, there's no actual discussion about the wife swap, and so that's not really alluded to. It's simply about Kay's death, and she's just like, what do I tell the kid, what do I tell our child? And Richard's like, I don't know, tell her the truth, tell her what happened. Priscilla really upset, and she initiates divorce proceedings. And then the movie turns into this detective type drama with Klein getting bailed and then going on this rampage trying to find evidence to clear his name. Let's just bring that up. Richard making bail after he is suspected of murder, that to me is another plot point. Now listen, I don't know too much about the American judicial system, but given the charges, I would have assumed that Klein's character, Richard, wouldn't have been able to make bail. Stranger things have happened, I guess, but that was another plot point for me. But then we have Richard go on this, journey to try and pick up clues, and, it's a detective. He turns into a kind of a rogue detective, almost. I don't know, just the seriousness of the charge, it just didn't make sense to me. And, this wasn't fraud, this was murder. It just took me out of the film to see Richard then, travelling everywhere, trying to get evidence to clear his name, and it's like, is he not a flight risk? Is he not, all these things? So, I don't know, it just didn't make sense to me. As the movie goes on, we get more and more clues that the whole murder was basically a setup, and Kevin Spacey is basically behind this whole thing. It was a scam, and Richard was basically the perfect fall guy for Eddie's operation. I mentioned it before, but yeah, Kevin Spacey is fantastic in this movie. He plays this, Jekyll and Hyde character very well. First, he can be your best friend and, wants to shower you with gifts and take you on these trips. The next, he's backstabbing you. So, yeah, the evilness of Eddie is slowly revealed over the course of the movie. Yeah, he's playing Richard, he's playing Priscilla, he's playing the cops, he's giving these false alibis to get away with this scam. So, the movie does have some very nice visuals, especially with Kevin Spacey holding a machine gun in the final act. You believe Spacey's portrayal of this sadistic, crazed guy who will do anything to remain innocent. I'm going to have to say though, I personally didn't expect the movie to end up with this shootout between Richard and Eddie. The half an hour, 40 minutes, the movie is very grounded and we're getting to know the characters. It's very dialogue heavy in, the movie in general. So at the end to have this shootout with this machine gun between Richard and Eddie, it just seemed a little bit tonally off for me. Once Kay is supposedly killed and the police force start investigating the case, I did become less interested in the story. I will admit I would have preferred the story to take a different direction than it did. I thought the movie would stay grounded, the same tone that it had for the first 40 minutes, and I thought this was going to be kind of a more dramatic kind of thing. Once the crime aspect, that could have been interesting, but it just became very cliche, and then always finding evidence. Oh, and Richard bumps into this person, just so happens to be at this scene. How convenient, just things like that. And I found the interesting or more intriguing aspect of the story about the wife swap in general, and do the wives consent? What happens post the wife swap in terms of the relationship? Do these relationships start to fall apart? That was what I was expecting, and yeah, we didn't get that here. So in terms of ratings, I am going to give this a 3.5 out of 10. As I've just said, I enjoyed the first 45 minutes of the film, but once Kay got murdered, it turned into a detective movie, but it became a cliche detective movie. He got bailed, as I said, and obviously he needed to get bailed so he could then find the evidence to show that Kevin Spacey was this crazy guy, but I just didn't buy it that he was able to get post-bond on this murder charge. It just didn't seem right to me. And yeah, is it worth watching? I would say it's worth watching for Kevin Spacey if you're a Kevin Spacey fan. I know he's a quite controversial character these days. I've always found him quite an interesting actor and his performances throughout the years. I know he got caught up in the Me Too movement a few years ago. He's faced several kind of accusations. Is what it is. You obviously make the decision if you want to check this out. But he does give a decent performance. Kevin Kline also is pretty good in this role. It's a decent thriller, and yeah, 3.5 for me.